Everyone. I am Martell Teasley, Dean of the University of Utah College of Social Work and Associate Provost at the University of Utah. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the second Talks with Teasley presentation of the 2021-2022 academic year. Before we get started, on behalf of the College of Social Work, I'm proud to recognize the contributions of our American Indian community by acknowledging that this land, which is named for the Ute tribe, is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Gochi, and Ute tribes. The University of Utah recognizes and respects the enduring relationship that exists between many indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. We respect the sovereign relationship between tribes, states, and the federal government, and we affirm the University of Utah's commitment to a partnership with Native nations and urban Indian communities through research, education, and community outreach. We're also an anti-racist college, and we pledge to engage in anti-racist practices through our research, education, and community outreach. Thank you to those of you who are joining us live today, and to those watching the recorded version of this in coming weeks. Additionally, thank you to those of you who have tuned in to our virtual events throughout the past 19 months, and to all of you who have supported the Student Emergency Fund. You have provided critical support for students in need during a crisis. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I am pleased to continue offering free CEUs for our events throughout this academic year. I invite you to join us for our upcoming events, including the next Talks with Teasley's presentation scheduled for November 17th, featuring Dr. Brad Lindahl, Dr. Richie Landwert, Dr. Mary Beth Vogel Ferguson, and Dr. Dorothy Tomoko Hall. Details on our upcoming events will be available on our events webpage. But today we're excited to showcase Dr. David Darasotis, or Dr. Dave as he likes to be called, one of our many College of Social Work faculty members working on an important topic for social workers. The presentation touches on the connection between environmental stability and human well-being, a much needed discussed topic, as well as a practice framework and opportunities for future scholarship, teaching, and service in this emerging area of social work practice. It is my great pleasure to introduce our presenter. Dr. David Darasotis earned his MSW from San Diego State University, followed by a PhD in psychology from International College in Los Angeles, and a PhD in social work from the University of California, Berkeley. He served as professor in the College of Social Work, focusing on mental health curriculum for 32 years prior to mostly retiring for the past year, even though he's still with us at a limited amount. We are glad to still get a little of his time, including for events such as this one. Throughout his years as a social worker professor, Dr. Dave has studied the interrelationship between human well-being and the well-being of other non-human life and the ecosystem that supports all life on Earth. His research has taught him that what we call mental health is inseparable from our relationship with our own body, other people, and the world surrounding us. Outside of his research and teaching schedules, you might find Dr. Dave enjoying nature, cycling, canyon hiking, or sleeping under the stars. Before I turn over to Dr. David Darasotis, I want to thank you again for joining us today. We hope this presentation and future events, along with the associated CEU opportunities, will serve you well. Take care. David, take it away.
Thank you, Dean Teasley, and thank you everyone who's participating. I'm super happy there's this many people that are interested in this topic, which obviously I'm interested in, or I wouldn't be presenting with you today. And what I'd like to do is, Emily twisted my arm and she's very persuasive. She made me do a PowerPoint. You know, my preference is always to hang out with people face to face if I can. But we will have a PowerPoint. You'll still be able to see me. I can't see you. I wish I could and just interact with you, but maybe some other time. So I'm gonna put my PowerPoint on and hopefully you can see it. If you can't, please let Emily know. I'm going to just start before I go to the first slide by sharing with you. I read that Barack Obama, when he was in his inauguration and giving his first speech after becoming president, he talked about how would our country be different if instead of, in the preamble, instead of we believe that all men are created equal, what if it would have said emphasized all people, so that regardless of the gender we identify with, the ethnicity and so on, that we are all created equal. And I think I totally agree with them on that. And I was reflecting that just for this presentation, what if, our Constitution said, we believe that all beings are created equal, and the ecosystems that keep us alive. How would our lives be different? And sort of with that in mind, just move into the first slide, which doesn't want to go. So, and I tested this, and so I'm going to just try, I'm going to reboot it. Maybe. I'm going to stop share, go back to my screen. Sorry, everybody. And see if I can get this to work. Okay, now it's working, but now I can't see me. Emily, can you see the screen?
We can't see the screen. I don't think you're screen sharing right now. If you want to try that again.
Okay, well, what happened now is, whoops. What happened now is I can see my PowerPoint, but I can't see me. So let's see. So I'm going to start over again. Okay, so now I can see me, and I'm going to start the slideshow again. So what's happening is that when I go to the slideshow, I disappear. Sorry, everyone. And I just had tested this and it worked fine, so I'm not sure. Okay, so I'm back here. And can you see me now?
We can see you. We just can't see your screen.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to try share screen again. And now you should be able to see the PowerPoint. Can you see the PowerPoint?
There we go. Yeah, it's not full screen yet, but you can give that a try.
Okay, so yeah, let me just see if that works. Let me try the slideshow one more time and see if I can get it to work from the beginning. You should be able to see it now.
Yep.
Oh, good.
There we go.
Okay. Yay. Thank you, the gods and goddesses of Zoom and PowerPoint. So here's 3 questions I just want you to reflect on as we start this adventure, talking about the connection between social work and deep ecology and climate change. What have I taken from the earth in my life? Have I ever reflected on that? And what have I given back to the earth in gratitude for what I've taken? When I think about that question, I think about I'm just breathing right now, right? And without being able to breathe, I wouldn't be alive, obviously. And how often have I been thankful about being able to have a breath? That I can remember once when I almost drowned, how thankful I was, right? And I was really thankful, maybe you all were, when smoke cleared finally this summer, that was in our air so often from the wildfires. And then the third question is, will there still be humans on Earth in the year 2100? So that's about, a little less than 80 years from now. And I'm curious what you all believe about that. And so as I do the rest of the PowerPoint, if you have a comment or question, please send it, to Emily, and I'll ask her if anyone's asked a question, and she may interrupt me too, which is fine. Okay. So let's start out by just talking about what is climate change, and how is it different than weather? And probably a lot of you already know this, so I apologize if I'm telling you things you already know, but just so that we're all on the same level about terms. So weather is what happens at a certain place at a certain time. So when I look out my window, there's no direct sunlight, but it's kind of cloudy and it's totally calm, like the leaves aren't fluttering. The weather at your house might be different, right? It might be sunny, might be some breeze. I know there's no breeze because there's an aspen outside and it just picks up any wind and the leaves are just kind of laying there staring at me. So local climate change, is how the average conditions have changed over a long time. And, probably most of you know this, but I put the two little woolly mammoth folks on the screen because they lived here in Utah up till maybe 12,000 years ago, maybe even more recently. And what's now the Great Salt Lake was underwater. And, we call that lake now Lake Bonneville. It's mostly dried up. It was much bigger than how big Salt Lake is. And Salt Lake covers a wide area, but 1,000 feet deep. So, and you can all see this by just driving out towards the airport and looking at the shelves, where there were ancient beaches and how the lake waves created, when the lake was at one spot for a long time, it created these benches, and that's why we call the edges of Salt Lake City the benches, because, they're basically old beaches. They probably didn't have sand, they probably were rocky, and what now look like mountains, many of them were islands. So we've had climate change. Global climate change refers to the whole planet, right? In contrast to local. And, climate change is connected to a bunch of other things too, which I'm not going to directly address, but just so you know that when we talk about climate change, it's interrelated with a bunch of other things that concern us about our very survival as a species and other living things like biodiversity loss, waste and pollution in our air, water, and soil. They're all interconnected. So the things that cause species extinctions, that the activities of us humans, and the activities of us humans that pollute, for example, are related to the activity, to the climate change, the warming. Okay, and I can't see you, so I'm assuming that you sort of get that, but you can ask questions if you have them. So 3 questions that people always ask: does climate change really exist? And we already said, well, yeah, because there were woolly mammoths and a bunch of other animals that don't exist anymore. There was an ice age, there were glaciers in the mountains. Temperature was cooler, significantly cooler 12,000 years ago. Did humans really cause the climate change that's happening today? And there's a tremendous amount of evidence that yes, we are causing it, mainly from creating greenhouse gases, which you probably are familiar with. CO2, carbon dioxide, is the most common one. That's part of the stuff that comes out of most of the things that we burn for power, our automobiles, industry, farming. There's so many activities that put carbon in our air. Does it matter? Yes. The answer to that is yes, it does matter that there's climate change, because in a few days, there's going to be, and I'll have a slide about this in a minute, a major conference where more countries than ever in the world are coming together November 1st, just a few days from now, to talk about how much it does matter. Because, if the average temperature of the Earth goes above what scientists say is over 1.5 degrees centigrade from the average temperature back a century and a half, that will create serious problems for us in terms of loss of property and life. And if it gets to 2 degrees, which the conference is supposed to be trying to head off, it will threaten even more lives and be more serious. And some scientists worry that it may be irreversible. So some politicians and leaders say, is it too expensive to fix? You know, is it going to harm our economy? And everything that I've read and talking to people that know more about this than me, it sounds like we could indeed create, just like President Biden has been talking about since he ran for office and got into office, that we can create an economy based on, you know, so-called clean energy, and that would be competitive with other countries in the world. In other words, we wouldn't all be in poverty if we you know, switch to a more green economy. However, some people might suffer, and you know, we can talk about that as social workers. It might turn out that, that some of the folks that would suffer the most from fixing this problem would be the very wealthy, you know, who own corporations that do a lot of the major polluting. And I have like little references on the bottom. And Emily, I think this PowerPoint will be available to folks that take this training. Correct me if I'm wrong. So what are some, I mean, I'm a therapist, but I'm also a community organizer, and I'm interested in policy. So I want this presentation to be micro, meso, macro, right? So what are some of the issues going on a policy level, economic and political in particular? So what are the motivations of folks that are climate change doubters? And I think this is really interesting research. You know, we think three of them are that they're more interested, that should say short-term self-interest. Many have a faith system that their understanding of that system is that that people have dominion over the planet. You know, not all people that identify with Christianity. In fact, I suspect it's a minority that believes that, you know, Christianity teaches that we should just, you know, use and abuse our planet. But there are folks that do believe that. And, you know, in other words, not all Christians agree, but there are folks that feel, and sometimes we call them fundamental Christians. Although I know folks that identify as fundamental Christians that believe that there is a climate change. So we don't want to generalize and say this about everyone. The other one is that some folks have an affiliation with big oil, gas, or coal. So the extraction industries, so they're afraid they're going to lose their jobs. And I feel really strongly that we ought to protect them. You know, as we move away from oil and gas and coal, because we're going to have to, if we're going to stop, you know, the temperature going up more than 2 degrees centigrade on average on the globe. You know, as we, you know, reduce the use of those fuels, some people will lose their jobs. And, you know, I think it's only right and fair to help them, you know, find other employment. They shouldn't be the only ones that lose their jobs. By the way, I just think this is a fun fact. What do you think the three things are that people who hate environmentalists say about environmentalists? And I'll give you a hint. It's the same three things that they would say about what we used to call in the 60s hippies. And that is that, you know, people that are environmentalists hug trees, smoke pot, and are promiscuous. And, you know, that's part of that cultural divide we sometimes talk about. And of course, not all of us hippies are like that, but it gives us this, you know, another insight into why there's this divide about climate change still in our country. There's a misunderstanding. And, you know, part of my work is just trying to get people to sit together and meet folks across these differences that divide us, and finding out that we are basically all human. UN this year declared 3 planetary crises: climate change, biodiversity loss, and waste and pollution. And like we said earlier, those are all interrelated and have interrelated, you know, and kind of come from the same basic causes. United Nations Emissions Gap Report, you know, they recommend that we reduce greenhouse gas releases by 56% this year, in other words, immediately. And that, you know, the most of the CO2 emissions come from the industrialized nations in the Northern Hemisphere. but folks in the Southern Hemisphere, suffer disproportionately, basically Africa and South America, Latin America. A good news around this whole issue of macro level is that renewable energy is going down. I actually have a couple clients that I work with that work in this super growing solar cell industry, and have told me how many jobs there are, and they can't fill all the positions, as an example. And the cost of using so-called renewable energy sources, like using waves in the ocean, or heat under the ground, or wind turbines, the cost of all those are going down too. A local example of a political issue, some of you probably are very aware of the Salt Lake City's inland port. I won't say a bunch of things about it today because there's a lot to talk about in just the time we have. But I will say that a lot of us are real concerned about what happened and how this was rushed, into being, and concerned about the environmental impact that the inland port would have. And if you're interested in a local project that could really make a difference for, especially for people on the west side, who will be affected by this in terms of traffic, noise, and air pollution, and also destruction of the environment around the area west of the airport. You might look at it, and you can go online and find out how to attend these meetings where people have a chance to talk about their positions. Okay. What is oh my goodness, I can't see the top of my screen, so I can't read it. Emily, can you see the top of the screen, or is it blocked for you too?
Your video is showing up over it, but I do have it pulled up on my other computer. It says, "What is enough? Sustainability fits social work values and is achievable."
Thanks so much, Emily. Yeah, and the main thing I want to emphasize is what is enough. And I think it's a great way to put forward maybe the core question is, how much is enough for each of us, to take from the earth to be happy? Do I really need, the size home I need, for example? And I threw on this slide a bunch of information that you could take a look at more later. For example, a household of 3 people, according to researchers, needs a minimum of 323 square feet. And think about how much square footage so many people have in our own communities, right? Much more than that, often for just 1 or 2 people, right? And then you add 107 additional square feet for each person. So researchers think that's enough for us, to have a decent life. We wouldn't suffer. I wouldn't suffer if I had less space in my house, probably be happier. A fair share of food, 2,353 calories a day for the average adult. A fair share of water for each person on the planet, 13 gallons a day. So you get the idea. And when we start to talk about it in those ways and think about, could it be enough for me to reduce my usage? Because the usage of the typical person in the United States is much higher in all these areas and most other areas too, right? And so we have this idea of global energy justice too. How much energy do we need, usually in the form of electricity, right? To have a decent life. And, researchers think that, to reduce, for everyone to have equity around, electricity, we'd have to restrict military production, restore ecosystems, have fewer airplanes that people travel in, more public transportation, fewer McMansions, more affordable housing, less feed for cattle, more veggies in the diet, and the ending of luxury goods. I don't know about all of you, but I'd be probably happier without those things, but we have a tremendous amount of money spent in our country selling us on the idea we need them. Don't you think? And to me, that's like a social work issue. And one of the main ideas I want to try to sell you on is the idea that that all this climate change jazz is interrelated with the social work values that we all hold. The ideas that we call it EDI these days, of equity, diversity, and inclusion. That that we believe in social work that all folks should have access to resources. We have enough stuff on the planet for people all to have decent housing and food and power. It's just not shared. I'll move on. And again, comments and questions, please send me. Emily, did anything show up so far?
We don't have any questions yet,
Okay.
but for anyone that wants to submit, you can use the Q&A feature and we'll get to them when Dr. Dave takes a break.
Okay, so that's either A, because I'm explaining it incredibly well, B, some of you are half asleep, or C, some other explanation I can't think of. So this, I'm going to give you all a little clue that in case you want to take the test for CEUs, you might just find some of the answers for that test on this particular slide. So Miyawaki forests are named this because there's actually a fellow with that name in Japan that started to design small forests that he planted in urban environments like Tokyo, starting in Japan, and now it's spread all over the world, that some urban centers are asking him and his folks to plant Miyawaki forests. And to my knowledge, we don't have one in Utah yet, but just in case that's on the test, you might remember what those are. And similarly, if you live within a few blocks of Foothill Drive, we're just picking on Foothill Drive here, but we could say Wasatch Boulevard, 21st South, MLK Drive, Redwood Road on the west side. Three things we can say tend to be true. Scores on intelligence tests for children tend to be reduced, which is pretty sobering to think about. And we're not sure of all the reasons for that, but it probably is a combination of air pollution, noise, congestion, stress. Creates higher levels of stress due to noise and congestion for adults as well. And is dangerous due to car exhaust, especially during the winter inversion. So all three of those things are true if I happen to live within a few blocks of Foothill Drive. Okay. And then the third point to make here is climate change is most likely associated with the temperature extremes and fires we now see in Utah, as well as on the West Coast. And we all, if you lived here this summer, you know what I'm talking about. Every time I wanted to go camping, which is a luxury, experience, and I always have gratitude when we go to the desert. It was smoky, and I read the other day that 95% of the United States, below outside of Alaska and Hawaii, had some smoke from the fires in the West Coast. So it's a big deal, and it's one of the reasons why they just said this morning on NPR that I forget how many countries they polled. I think it was 33. That about 2/3 of all the people in 33 countries across the planet say that we should do more about climate change. So the politics have switched and swung, and politicians, they pay attention to that. So to me, that's good news. Okay, so the COP26, that's what's starting November 1st. And I wanted to add a slide here about that. This is the Conference of the Parties. That's what COP stands for. 26 means the 26th annual. And it's in Glasgow this year. You probably heard some stuff in the news about this. All the countries are expected to say this is what they're going to be trying to do in the next years to reduce emissions. And there's also an expectation that more wealthy countries are going to be giving money, not lending it to poorer countries to finance their green programs, because it's not cheap, to switch from oil, gas, and coal to renewables. And there's some issues already. For example, I was just reading that China and India haven't announced their plans yet, as far as I know, as of today. And although $2 trillion has been pledged by rich countries, only 100 billion is, although 2 trillion is needed, experts say only about 100 billion has been pledged. And apparently over the years that the COPs have met, the money that's pledged doesn't always get paid. So, we've got some challenges, right? And, this year, they're hoping to agree on rules for carbon markets, loss and damage, and signing up on action plans. If you're interested in this, NPR has a program. I listened to it last night that I'm sure they're running still today, maybe even tomorrow, about the COP26. And you can find out more about it by just, you can go online and see when they're going to play this again, okay? What I'd like to do now, which I think a lot of you might enjoy, and I wanted to make this relevant to people who are practitioners, because most of us are either therapists or we're doing case management, we're doing direct service to people. So I think, and this is kind of a lot of my life work and social work, that there's a whole bunch of evidence that there's a body, mind, spirit, environment connection. And that used to sound really touchy-feely, way out there, hippie, tree-hugging, pot-smoking kind of language. But there's so much evidence for it from, and I won't try to bore you with that. We're already short on time, but I want to give you some examples of what I mean. So we could think of deep ecology, as a branch of practice, just as legitimate as any other branch. And in some ways more advanced, because the most advanced theory in social work or in any field is the most inclusive. The most advanced theory of practice is the most inclusive. It adds all the things that are relevant, right? And so our well-being is in fact interconnected with the well-being of other living things and the ecosystems that support our life. That's not just theory, we know that to be true. And there's, for example, there's indicator animals that when they die, when they disappear from the environment around us, that means we're in trouble, because they tend to die when there's higher levels of pollution. And I won't go into details about this, but in this beautiful state we're in with so much to offer, and Utah has the advantage of being a place where people would come and pay a lot of money just to ski here and look at the Red Rock and on and on and on. And we still argue with the federal government, and I'm showing my biases, but I think it's okay to show biases because professors get to profess. It really frustrates me that we're fighting with we're going to sue the federal government because the federal government has the audacity to save Bears Ears and the Grand Staircase, from further development. I was just in the Swell with my wife not that long ago, and we saw all these oil rigs being built in some of the side canyons. We both, what happened there? I remember reading about that. But during the time that after President Trump, took away protection for those areas in Utah, major gas, oil, coal extraction industries swooped in to try to, do more extraction, and that's not what we need. Plus we could probably make a lot of money, I think, catering to tourists on all different levels. So it's not only the right thing to do, it's economically smart in the long run, because there's not infinite coal, oil, and gas anywhere, right? So it's just a thought in that. You may disagree with me, but I'm just professing. There's a whole literature on deep ecology. Oops. Let's see. I won't read this all to you, but there's a lot in the literature. I just emphasize some of the ones. You might be interested in ecofeminism. Social work has an ecofeminist perspective to it. There's also an ecofeminist perspective on deep ecology, which talks about the link. And I think they have a point between a male-dominated culture and the destruction of the planet. That not that it's just men's fault, that we're in the situation we are with climate change, but I think that they have a point. We could debate that if you want and talk about that. And I'm just going to move on, show you a couple more slides here. So this is probably my favorite slide, and we'll spend the rest of, we got 4 more minutes by my clock before questions and answer time. So what are some deep ecology interventions? So if you're seeing clients maybe you're working at the homeless shelter, maybe you have a private practice, maybe you work for Family Counseling Services or Department of Human Services. You might want to read James Hillman, who said, nature is the great healer. When all else fails, think about your own life. When you're really bummed or anxious, how many times did you go outside and take a walk and feel a little bit better? I don't know about you, but when I go outside, trees don't seem like critical beings to me. And I feel like they hug me more than I hug them. And, I feel the same way about the night sky. My favorite thing to do is to be able to sleep outside and, stare at it if I can, when camping. I think Hillman's right. Nature is a partner in our helping people to heal, and we could find creative ways to do that. For example, garden therapy. There's other fancy names for it, but the idea is that people benefit in measurable ways, just from raisin stuff. And, instead of spending all our water on growing grass and then cutting it down like once or twice a week, what if everyone in our city and counties had a little garden, with a drip line, so now we're not wasting water. If you have children around, they love it. It gives people something to do that's useful. We start to eat locally. Some biologists think that local foods actually are better for us too, because they are in the same conditions we're in. Similarly, having animals around can be therapeutic and has been shown to be related, just like gardening, to our psychological well-being and our physical well-being, body, mind, spirit, environment, connection. So, and we all know about, equine therapy, hanging out with horses like the woman here is, and there's dogs and even cat therapists. Over the years, we used to have dogs and cats. I don't know if we're going to do it this spring. I think actually Lisa helped with that. I think Lisa's on this program, but they would show up in the building. But animal therapy also can include, like raising my own chickens and having eggs. It's legal in most of our communities in Utah. And, the chickens could, instead of, mowing down things that grow in my yard, why not feed some goats and chickens? So they make a little noise in the morning, but the roosters do. But think about all the other noise that we have to deal with that isn't so healthy for us, like we're talking about Foothill Drive. So having animals seems to lower our blood pressure, make us feel better about ourselves. Wilderness therapy is sort of a niche kind of programming. Some of it has, just from my perspective, been a little bit problematic, when children are taken forcibly and, abducted almost into the wilderness from, often financed by their wealthy parents. And that's sometimes called wilderness therapy. And a lot of us struggle with that idea, but there are many programs in wilderness therapy that aren't like that just give children a right to voluntarily be outside, especially children from minoritized populations that don't visit the wilderness areas like more privileged children do. And we know there's lots of evidence that being outside in unspoiled areas like Bears Ears, Grand Staircase is good for us, plain and simple. And we could talk more about that. Walking and hiking. I know a couple therapists who they walk or hike with their clients. And, they have to get a release because, that could be seen as, like if you're seen walking with your therapist, people know you're seeing them. But, with the proper legal release, a lot of folks like that. And I like the idea of thinking about two people walking together. It's a different model of what therapy is than sitting. Virginia Satir used to say most therapy is a vertical thing, where I would stand up in front of one of you to show you this, and I'm telling you what to do, and I'm fixing you and treating you, a vertical relationship. When I walk together, it's a horizontal relationship, and we're both looking at the same view. And so something about walking and hiking that's healing. Just a couple more and we're almost done. Intergroup dialogue. Some of you are like doing facilitation, and I'm happy to talk to any of you about this. We're actually doing a dialogue tonight if you're interested with Utah Humanities. Google it. It's free. It's open to the public. we do a different social justice issue every month. And like I said, 6:30 tonight, we're going to have one of my Peace and Conflict Studies students talk about, was the Afghanistan war worth it? And what we often do is bring people together with different points of view. And, he'll speak for a while about his expert opinion as a, as an ex, or actually still in the military service in the Marines, I believe. But, then we talk across our differences and see if we can bridge those divides. And I'll just add, becoming an activist in local and global community can be another way. And I gave you the inland port as a great example of that. And I am fired up about, the problematic nature of the inland port and how it was developed. I could tell you a bunch of creepy things about that if we had more time, but my time is up and I'm going to see if I can end the show here. Yay, it worked. And then come back and hopefully interact with some of you for a few minutes. We could talk about what any of these topics or any other questions you have. I'm sure you must have something on your mind or you wouldn't have wanted to attend this. So Emily, can you see anything on there yet?
Yeah, we have lots of questions coming in.
Okay.
So to start, we have, could you please talk a little more about the research being done around the ecology interventions? I've not heard of garden therapy before, but I feel like I did a lot of it during the pandemic.
Yeah, me too. Go online with a lot of these things and just play around with it. You'll find all sorts of things, like this wide range of things from, research from scientists to, YouTubes about grow your own potatoes. I was, one of the blessings I got from my mom was always had a garden every summer. We lived in Chicago. And if you can grow something in Chicago, you can grow it anywhere, I think. And so I kind of got the bug about that, I guess. And we know that when people do gardening, they tend to have improved physical and mental health indicators. So what's that mean? Like less depression, less anxiety, lower blood pressure, lower heart rate. And it's just, we see the same thing like in a hospital. There's actually research that shows if there's just a plant in your recovery room after surgery, you get better faster. If you happen to be on the side of University Hospital that looks to the foothills, you get better faster than if you're in a room on the other side of the building that looks into the valley, because you get to see green stuff. So, there's a guy named E.O. Wilson, and he has a theory called biophilia. And some people call it ecophilia. And you could Google that idea too and look at his theory and the research he did. What the whole idea of that is that philia means affiliation, like in Philadelphia, that humans have a natural affiliation with natural things because that's where we grew up. I mean, we didn't, evolve on Foothill Drive. We evolved in Africa, probably East and Southern Africa. People that look like us, maybe 200,000 years ago. So we grew up around nature, and it's good. So we're quote unquote meant to be around natural things. I hope that's helpful a little bit. What else you got, Emily?
All right, let's see. We've got another question that says, I'm taking a class in Native American Studies, and we have been discussing the land treaties and how the tribes are fighting to either keep or take back the land that they are connected to.
Right.
Is this something that we could see help the growing CO2 emissions? And also, where can we find resources of the different ecology interventions that you have spoken about?
Okay, so one thing you do is I like almost all my textbooks have things on these have examples of this. So I have a book called Advanced Generalist Social Work Practice, and in there is a list of a lot of these things, plus references on how to find more. And there's also on the power. Emily, can they get a copy of the PowerPoint?
Yeah, I can definitely send that out.
Okay, so if you look at the PowerPoint, there's a reference for an article I did for the Encyclopedia of Ecological Spaces, and in there there's a list of interventions that psychologists, social workers, MFTs, others can use with their clients, and references and how to find it. And that article is available free online. The encyclopedia is available to people to just take a look at. There's a lot more than, those are just things that I've done to try to put together, lists. You also see on the slideshow, there's some references for all these things on some of the other slides that you can find as well. I like your idea of working with American Indian folks. I spent many years actually working with the urban Indians at what used to be the urban walk-in center, and now it's Urban Indian Center on 13th South by the tracks. And they have contacts with people on the reservations. We have more reservations than most states do in our state. And one of my colleagues, I'm not sure she's here today, but Tasha, who's one of our professors, has contacts with Four Corners people. Tasha identifies as American Indian as well. And, you could, if you're at the school or want to contact her, I'm sure she'd be happy connecting with folks that she knows that are on the Navajo and Ute reservations, as well as some of the smaller reservations in Utah. I think that a lot of American Indians are our natural allies in, working to reduce climate change and protect the wildlands we still have left. And, for example, I've done some dialogues where we had ranchers and politicians who were mainly opposed to Bears Ears meet with American Indian leaders, as well as environmentalists, like Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance folks. And we had a pretty decent conversation and found some things in common despite our differences, because my experience is that most people, like, for example, the ranchers that I've met, most of them are just as reasonable as those of us that live in the city, and they don't want nature destroyed either. They just want to have some say and feel like they're represented. And they understandably don't want to be treated like they're stupid just because they live in rural areas. And I can see how they get annoyed with intellectual elites, from universities, like me, right? So I think an important thing to do is to get to know people who live in rural areas and form alliances with them as well. Emily, you said he had a lot of questions, so I'm going through these, trying to cover it, but go through it kind of quickly so I can respond to more than a couple people.
Yeah, let's see. We've got another question for you. What are some strategies for the winter in encouraging clients or students to use nature for their recovery and treatment process, especially with inversion, which can be dangerous, and if they don't have access to transportation? Yeah,
that's a great question. Well, I mean, a couple things come to mind. I'm sure there's 1,000. My wife and I bought a couple really simple greenhouses for not that much money, like about 5 years ago, and they still have held up. They're just simple plastic things, but they let light in. And I put them in the backyard in a spot where the sun hits the fence, so it's warmer, and I clear the snow off, and you can grow stuff during the winter. There's like vegetables that are green, that are more cold resistant. And even when it got really, really freezing, I mean, they didn't like it, but they held in there through the spring. So you can actually do some gardening as well as in your house. One of the things that comes to mind is skiing, which is kind of a privilege. Don't you think it's a privileged activity? It's not cheap. You can do, you can put on skins and go up by yourself, but a lot of folks, particularly people who belong to populations that are already minoritized, they don't go skiing as much. We know that. And so, what if you did a project, bringing young people who normally would never have a chance? You'd have to find some kind of funding source and get them involved in it. there's lots of places to go. What we had during the pandemic, and we still have, is, some people, I did a little KRCL show where we interviewed, some of the folks at Alta about, the traffic jams that are just terrible now going up there. And, and there's no easy solution to that, but there's lots of places in Utah where you can enjoy the winter and get out if you're into that kind of thing. You can do cross-country skiing. It's just helping people get out there and letting them know that they're welcome, I think, and yeah, the air pollution is a problem, and the inland port will make that worse. And, from what I understand and what I've been told by, folks in the mayor's office and the county mayor's office, they are actually trying to change the air pollution standards because the emissions that are predicted to happen from, the inland port are above, break the rules. And so they're going to raise the standards and say we're not polluting because, we don't. That's how powerful the people are that are pushing the inland port. I'm not sure I'm going to be any happier with an inland port. Are you? Why do we really need it? And who benefits from it is important. So one thing you could do during the winter when you get upset like I do about the stupid air pollution is try to do something about the major polluters, in our city. Because, Salt Lake will always have inversions, but they don't have to be as dirty as they are. And, we can all do something about that. So being an activist is good for us too, by the way. There's a number of studies that show that when I fight the feeling that I can't do anything, there's nothing I can do about this and it's all hopeless. And, anything that I can do. There's a book called Committed Youth by, I'm trying to remember the guy's name, but you could look it up, where he finds that young people who are committed, it doesn't even matter what the side of an issue they're on, but they're committed to an issue and do something about it, they do better, physically and psychologically. So those are some ideas. I hope they're helpful. Another one, Emily, please. You got a couple more minutes.
Yeah, we've got time for a few more. Let's see. What resources are available at the University of Utah that offer opportunities for exploring eco-psychology and related topics in greater depth?
Yep. A good friend of mine used to be the director. Now they have a new one of the Environmental Humanities program. We've got one of the coolest EAH programs in the country. And, just recently a master's degree, from what I understand there too. They're a great resource on our campus, and and great faculty, and they're interested in all these subjects. So that's one piece. I'm in partial retirement, but I am happy to talk with any of you. If you can reach me through my email will still exist for years. They're almost eternal. And you can, and I'm still working at the school till March of 23. So contact me if you like, and I'd be happy to talk with you about some of these things too. And I probably still can do independent studies with students, like if you're a student on campus, I've done that with many people over the years, an independent study on deep ecology I've done before. If you're off campus, I'm still happy to talk with you. And and discuss your interests and maybe suggest a direction you might want to go in, because I'm super happy so many of you are interested. What else, Emily?
Let's see.
Thanks, Lisa. Look how on top of this Lisa is. She just shoots out my email. Thank you. Emily?
All right. Do you use any deep ecology methods in your practice, and how have you gone over?
And how has that gone over?
Yes.
People like it. People like a body, mind, spirit, environment approach. I've been concerned about the emphasis on CBT in social work, and I have a lot of colleagues who are in the country. We're a minority now, not because I don't use it myself. Really, it's Buddhism, because, in Buddhist psychology, cognitive, what we now call cognitive behavioral was used for thousands of years. So I'm not against it. It's just that it's mainly from my perspective and many people's perspective about symptom reduction, right? And there's more to helping people than just reduce their pain. I'm not into people should have all the pain they need, but to me, deep healing and transformation requires that we look at other approaches. And deep ecology, I think one of the things we can do collectively is say, this is a legitimate area of work. And folks might say, well, you don't have any research showing that it has efficacy. But what I would say back is, people who teach the philosophy of science say that, the purpose of research always has to be deconstructed and thought about in a critical way. And if the purpose of almost all our studies of practice is to show what methods reduce, some of the symptoms like of depression and anxiety, I would say that that's not my purpose solely. My purpose is also to help people heal and for us collectively to heal our planet, and maybe rewild some of our spaces, and so I have some passion about this. I think it's important that we ask for other kinds of approaches to be considered and not just shrink our perspective on what's appropriate therapy, to these methods that are supposed to make people feel a little bit better. And I also think often these methods, are beneficial to insurance companies because they, as you all know, if you've done this kind of work, they limit the number of times you can see a client, and sorry, you get 5.2 sessions because you're not sick enough. And, in some cases, not all, that's really problematic because I've had clients that needed to talk on and off for years to deal with their deep trauma stuff, and just trying to help reduce their symptoms feels to me like, just a Band-Aid. So, so I hope that some of you, push for that, for the development of theories of, deep ecology work, and also push for some researchers to start studying it, because the vast majority of social work researchers don't even study, approaches like, gardening and, working with animals and so on and so forth yet. But it's coming, we've had a couple doctoral students interested in it over the years, but they're not in the majority, and I think it'll be a while before that comes back, but our clients are always ahead of us. And what I found is people want this kind of work, and so those of you that are, in earlier mid-career might consider adding some of this dimension to it. I'm going to try to address some of these things at the spring NASW conference. I think I'm going to do a training then, and you might be interested in taking that. I think we're going to call it community healing during the pandemic, but it'll also address climate change as well as racial tension in the country and the impact on community mental health and some approaches around that. Do we have time for another one, Emily, or are we done?
It looks like we're just about out of time. So thank you so much, Dr. Dave, for your awesome presentation and answering everyone's questions. And thank you all for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for all of you that came to this program. Yes, Amy just asked, is the program about, tonight with Utah Humanities, was the war worth it? Yes, it is. And if you're interested in seeing dialogue and participating, please join us tonight. It's free, and it's just an hour and a half. If you don't like it, we won't take it personally if you just check it out and leave. But I think you'll be interested. The young man who's speaking, who's our expert, knows a lot about. He was in Afghanistan and has had a lot of personal experiences. And after we listen to him for a few minutes, we'll have a conversation. Was it worth it going to Afghanistan? If something like 9/11 happened again, should we do something different next time? Besides invading a country and staying there for 20 years. So thanks, Molly. Just saw your thank you so much message. And Colleen. Emily and Lisa, thanks for letting Dr. Dave do a program.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining our Talks with Teasley program. Our next Talks with Teasley will be on November 17th. So we hope everyone will come and join us for that one too. But thanks again to everyone and have a great afternoon.
Bye-bye.